We've been talking about the Chinese AI models for a little bit on this channel now. And one common denominator for all of them is that they are all very cheap, if not free to use. I found this video today, The Real Reason Chinese AI is Free by Better Way. And I thought it would be interesting to watch it and kind of learn about why these AI models are way more affordable than an Anthropic model or an OpenAI model or even a Gemini model. So yeah, let's get into it.
If you've been paying attention to AI model releases over the last couple of years, you've probably noticed a pattern. A powerful new model drops, it benchmarks well against the best Western alternatives, and it's free to download. And they're built in China. DeepSeek, Qwen, GLM, Moonshot. These models have made headlines not just because of their performance, but because they're openly available in a way that OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google have never really been. So the obvious question is, why? Why are Chinese AI?
It kind of does make you wonder is how good is a ChatGPT 5.5 if a DeepSeek version 4 is like dipping at the heels? You know, how good is a Gemini 3.1 when these other models can compete and catch up? Is the value for these models inflated? And is the cost of compute that they have to keep getting investors and get these big numbers, is that like a big inflated number for the cost of compute? Like do they really need that much compute if these other models with less money going into them can perform just as well? I mean, obviously we know part of it is the Chinese models wait for these newer releases, wait for like a new Anthropic release or OpenAI release, and they try to kind of reverse engineer how they got to that level, and try to with specific prompting methods, they're able to kind of extract the data from these models and figure out how these models were trained and kind of train their own models in that specific way. Anthropic came out with they had a press release a few months ago where they said they blocked like something like 20,000 users or 20,000 instances of Claude being reverse engineered by, and I don't know if they specifically said China, but they were implying that it was these other companies that were trying to figure out how Claude is the frontier model, and they were trying to figure out what goes into training Claude and what goes into maintaining Claude so that they can kind of compete with that. So it could be two-way. It could be two things. It could be that these Chinese AI models just wait. They let the American models do the heavy lifting and then just kind of come around, make something just as good, or like maybe a notch below as good as an OpenAI or as good as a ChatGPT or a Claude. And they kind of secured that market where if you're an enterprise that can't afford those frontier models, yeah, sure, you would go for them. But for majority of people, a Qwen, a GLM, a DeepSeek is way more affordable to at least get you started, to at least help you conceptualize whatever you're working on. And then if you can scale and you can afford it, then you move on to a Claude or a ChatGPT or a Gemini.
Companies giving this stuff away, while Western companies are building subscription tiers and usage-based pricing and locking frontier models behind APIs. The answer is more strategic than it is.
I mean, locking frontier models behind APIs, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? They really, here's the thing. You can give someone an amazing tool that does a lot of things, but if the person doesn't know what to do with it, or they do very basic stuff with it, obviously they're not gonna really find value in that, because they have limits on what they want to do with the tool. You lock the frontier models behind API so that you basically create some friction so that not everybody can access that. You need to set up your infrastructure in a way where you can access that model and you have the know-how on how to access that model. So not only you learn stuff along the way, but they basically, it's like a test. It's like they're testing you to see, okay, how bad do you want this model? Are you able to do X, Y, and Z to get to it? Because these are the best models that we have, and we don't want everybody to use it if they're just going to clog up compute and have them whip up an infinite poem that keeps going on and on and on. It's just fucking destroy our costs, right? They really want people who can actually do stuff with these APIs, who know how to use these APIs so that they can create a barrier to entry. I think a part of locking those models behind API is that. And then it comes to affordability. You can't access the top tier models right up front. Sometimes you need to be a paying customer of OpenAI just to be able to get to 5.5. You have to consistently been paying, and you consistently been using the API to be able to even unlock 5.5. And then you gotta verify, and then you gotta do all these other types of things just to be able to access that. So I think those types of frictions are necessary to eliminate users that are just won't find any value, or they're not gonna be able to use the model to the extent that they're able to be used. And those users are better off using the chat UI, and they're better off using other alternatives that is more beneficial to them versus just accessing the top tier model right then and there for free. That doesn't make sense to me.
Is ideological, and it starts with a distinction that most people miss. When people say a model is open source, they usually mean you can download it, run it, and use it. But that's not what open source actually means. True open source means full transparency. The model weights, but also the training data, the training pipeline, the infrastructure decisions, and everything needed to reproduce the model from scratch. What most Chinese models actually release, and what most open models globally release, to be fair, is something called open weight. The trained model is available, the weights are downloadable, but the training data stays private and the full reproducibility just isn't there. This distinction matters because it changes what openness actually gives you. With a truly open source model, a sufficiently resourced team could understand exactly how it was built and replicate it. With an open weight model, you get a capable tool, but you're still dependent on the original team for the next version. The model is open, the process just isn't. Most people don't make this distinction because it doesn't affect daily use. You can still run the model locally, fine-tune it, and build products on top of it. The practical accessibility is real, but calling it open source in the same breath.
But you personally can't iterate on it. I'm picking up what he's putting down. When something's truly open source, you're able to iterate on it and reproduce it to your needs, so that not only you fine tune it, but you also basically customize it on a deeper level. But if it's open weight, you can download it, you can run it, but you're not able to fully reproduce it the way an open source model would let you.
As, say, Linux is misleading in a way that benefits the companies releasing these models. Open weight is a distribution strategy. Open source is a philosophy. So they're not the same thing. So why do Chinese companies lean toward open weight releases when Western frontier labs have largely stayed closed? The honest answer is that it's a different competitive position, not a different set of values. Western AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, have built their business models around model access. You pay for API calls and a subscription to their product. Keeping it closed is how you protect the thing you're selling, and they can do this because they have access to more compute, thanks to companies like NVIDIA, which gives their models better capabilities. If OpenAI open-weighted GPT-5, anyone could build a competitor on top of it without paying for the underlying compute that went into training it. Closed is how you capture revenue. Chinese companies are operating in a different context. They are a lot more constrained on compute. So if you can't outcompute your competitor,
they are more constrained on compute right now. They are doing so much work to stay competitive at the compute level, and with the chips they're developing and with the way they're optimizing their models. I think one of the things about DeepSeek when it first came out was how cheap it was to run and how little compute it took. It wasn't like the most revolutionary model, right? But because it was as good as a ChatGPT 4 and it was kind of hitting some of the same metrics, again, it's not one-to-one comparable at all. I understand that, and if ChatGPT is up here, it's two notches below, right? But then 2 notches below is still useful for a lot of people that don't need the extra 2 notches to kind of get exactly what they want. So imagine you are working on, you don't have NVIDIA chips, and you kind of using these models with like barely anything that you have, right? But as time goes on, you're able to get better chips than what you have. They're not NVIDIA chips, right? But they're still very, very comparable chips. I think that's one of the advantages that China has, is they can get really close to what the frontier labs, the Anthropics and the OpenAI, they can get really close to what they got going on. And maybe not at the massive compute level that what we're seeing right now, even though some of the data center construction might be a little shaky. And even though we might not have as many data centers as we thought we would for these Western frontier models. But at the same time, if the Chinese companies are able to use their own chips to reach the same level as Anthropic and OpenAI with less compute, that's like a breakthrough in and of itself. Where something like an Anthropic or OpenAI, they go for the best of the best. They want to be the best of the best no matter what. Even though if it's expensive, even though they need a lot of compute, their models can do everything and anything, and they can do all this, all that. Chinese models keep going for efficiency, and they're going for affordability. They're going for mass use and mass production, where you can download our out distribute. That's what they're talking about. They're mass distribution. You can download our model. You can use it here. You can use it there. Don't worry about, we already trained it to a certain point, but you can train it even further. You can kind of build what you got on top of that. I feel like in the future that's going to be a bigger advantage, because the future is not so I'm rambling a little bit, but this is what I think is going to be the two competing futures that we got going on. We have one future that's data centers, cloud. If you have an internet access, you can access these models, but they're closed, as in somebody's controlling your access. You don't have an offline access to these models. You don't have offline capabilities with these models. You always have to be connected. So your prompts get logged, your output gets logged, and in order to get the best of the best from these Western frontier models, everything's closed in a box, and you have to kind of pass through these guidelines and pass through whatever Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google deem okay. On the other hand, you have this other future where these models become so efficient that they're just able to run on your phone. And a model that's comparable to the Sonnet 3.7 running on your phone offline, where you would only give it web search capabilities if you needed it, but for everything else you would just use it offline, and you wouldn't even use any data. It wouldn't even log what you prompted. It wouldn't even log the output. That's entirely possible if these models get more efficient and more efficient. They get over distributed on everything, and people are able to experiment with them on their own hardware. So I think these are the two competing futures we got going on. The Western models and Western companies love locking you down and kind of securing you in that ecosystem. And the Chinese companies, they just want you to be able to use it anywhere you got. And they're going for accessibility, and they're going for users being able to customize it, and users be able to kind of do what they want with these models, and kind of not to a crazy level, but they're trying to be less restrictive than an Anthropic or an OpenAI.
You have to out-distribute them. That is China's strategy. Openness is how China is building an ecosystem when you can't dominate purely on model performance. But even that gap is closing in very quickly. There's also a domestic policy dimension. The Chinese government has made domestic AI development a national priority. Releasing capable open-weight models accelerates adoption across Chinese enterprises, research institutions, and developers, which serves both the company's distribution goals and the government's broader agenda of AI
I do wonder. I mean, Anthropic is working with the government, OpenAI is working with the government, but they're still working on a capacity where it's not as open as the Chinese models, right? And they still, because the models are so proprietary, that they would love, they want to lock these down and only give you access to what you would need, even though you're in a government position, you're in a research position and all that, but you would only get to use these models to the capacity that Anthropic and them deem worthy. But the opposite of that is in China, where because they're open, you would just get the model, you get your own hardware, you get your own compute, and you basically use the model any way you deem fit, because they developed the model in a way that you are able to customize it.
Self-sufficiency. These two motivations happen to align, and that alignment makes open release an obvious choice. So how do they make money? Monetization for these companies comes from somewhere else entirely. Alibaba, which releases Qwen, makes money from cloud infrastructure. DeepSeek is backed by a quantitative hedge fund. The model isn't the product. The ecosystem, the cloud services, the enterprise contracts are. Giving the model away
Yeah, but you still can make API calls with DeepSeek and Qwen and all that. So they still have the ability to charge you on that way. But the funnel that he's putting out here is correct. It's right on the money. Is you want to give away the free model, have the regular people use it and get used to it, and the interested developers kind of funnel in there. And then when you start to scale up and you need that compute and cloud infrastructure, then they can actually pay and kind of use your infrastructure, because they're used to all your services and all your softwares.
Drives adoption, and adoption drives the things they actually charge for. This is also the same logic Meta uses when releasing Llama. Meta doesn't sell AI models. Meta sells advertising. Having a widely adopted open weight model creates an ecosystem that benefits Meta's infrastructure and AI tooling without directly threatening their revenue model.
This is just for right now, though. Meta is working on a different model. That's what the rumors have been. I don't know if how far along is it? It might be coming out soon. And actually, you know what? Now that we are here, let's see. Meta has announced Muse Spark, the first in a series of large language models from Meta Superintelligence Labs, designed as a faster, more capable successor to Llama models, currently live on Meta AI app and website. So this one, Muse Spark, is not open. Oh man, this is not the open one anymore, but it's multimodal, and they're trying to get closer to what Anthropic and OpenAI got going on. So, and they just announced it April 8th. So it just came out like very recently, like 3 weeks ago. So yeah, so even Meta is kind of rethinking the open source and open weight models.
In that sense, Meta and Chinese AI labs are playing a similar game. They're just coming from different starting positions, but Meta does seem to be going into closed models as well with its release of Muse Spark.
There we go.
Now, there are genuine advantages to this approach, both for users and for the releasing companies. And if you need a concrete example of what this looks like in practice, look at what happened with Cursor last month. Cursor launched Composer 2, their new flagship coding model, to over 1 million daily active users. The announcement described it as a proprietary model built through continued pre-training and reinforcement learning, language that implied they built something from scratch. Within hours, a developer figured out that the model's internal identifiers showed it was actually trained on Kimi K 2.5, a Chinese open weight model from Moonshot AI. Cursor's VP of Developer Education confirmed it the same day. Cursor's co-founder called it a miss to not mention the Kimi base in our blog from the start. Now, to be fair, roughly 3/4 of the compute used to train Composer.
I mean, at that point, if it's three-quarters of it, if it's the base is just Kimi, you just have to mention it a little bit. You would just have to throw it in a small mention, and then you would be fine. The fact that you represented your model as being entirely new, built from scratch, that you are misrepresenting what you worked on and all that. So I mean, they just shot themselves in the foot in that one.
2 came from Cursor's own reinforcement learning work on top of the base. They didn't just slap a UI on Kimi. but the foundation was Kimi, a $9 billion American startup, building its flagship AI product on a Chinese open weight model and not mentioning it. That's what open distribution actually looks like when it's working. Ecosystem growth is faster when the barrier to entry is zero. Developers who can run a model locally and fine-tune it for a specific use case can build familiarity with that model family and its API conventions. Even if you start with the free local version, you often end up paying for the hosted version at production scale. The open release is, in some sense, the best possible marketing. Local deployment is also a real benefit that gets underappreciated. If you're running
I mean, yes and no. If you don't have the OpenAI $800 billion valuation, if you don't have Anthropic's 30 billion a year revenue, and all those promises of future investments, and all those data centers supposedly being built, if you don't have those, yeah, this is a good idea. I get that. But if you are a frontier Western lab, it does make more sense to present yourself as the exclusive, top of the line, the bleeding edge of the technology. And the aura of exclusivity in and of itself is going to give you a lot more credibility. And it's going to make a lot more enterprises want to work with you because you don't give out your models like that. So the enterprises that they're targeting to work with, or Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google, there are different enterprises than what some other developers are using Chinese models. So it's just two totally different environments that they're kind of working with, because they're already drowned in compute costs. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, they're already drowning in that, right? Maybe not Google, not as much, but the other two. So in order to be able to kind of keep their heads above water, they need to get these big investments. They need to make these big contracts happen, and then they need to present themselves as the AI company to work with. And just the mid-size AI companies just can't compete with that. The lower size AI companies just can't compete with that. So they're going for a totally different market, and it's for them. What our friend here is saying makes sense, but it also makes sense what Anthropic and OpenAI doing. That also makes sense. So I feel like both methods do work. It's just because they're targeting two entirely different markets.
A model on your own hardware, your data doesn't leave your environment. For enterprises with sensitive data like healthcare, legal, and finance, this is valuable. The ability to run capable AI in an air-gapped environment exists almost exclusively because open weight models exist. And for researchers, open weights accelerate everything. You can study the model's behavior, identify failure modes, run evaluations, and build new techniques on top of existing foundations. The pace of AI research in the open weight space has been faster than the closed weight space in many areas, specifically because the tooling and knowledge base compounds more quickly when people can actually look at what they're working with. But the limitations of this model are real and worth naming clearly. Open weight is not the same as auditable. You can download the weights, but you can't verify what data was used to train the model, whether it was filtered for specific content, or whether there are embedded behaviors that aren't obvious from normal use. The model is accessible. The training process is still a black box. For anyone doing serious risk assessment, that gap matters. Licensing is also more complicated than it looks. Many open weight models come with restrictions on commercial use above certain usage thresholds, and prohibitions on using the model to train competing models. These restrictions are easy to overlook when you're evaluating whether you can use a model, and they can create real legal exposure for companies that don't read the fine print. Open weight is not the same as free to use without restriction. One thing worth being clear about, because it comes up constantly, is the relationship between openness and data privacy. Open weight does not mean your data is being collected. A model running entirely on local hardware, processing your inputs and returning outputs without network calls, has no mechanism to send your data anywhere. The data risk profile of a local model is fundamentally different from the data risk profile of a hosted API, regardless of which country the company is based in. The relevant question isn't, is this model from China? It's, where is this inference happening? A Chinese open weight model running on your own server is, from a data exposure perspective, lower risk than a Western closed model processing your queries on someone else's infrastructure.
And that's exactly what we're talking about earlier, where if you're able to just use it on your own hardware and they are efficient and they work, you are better off using the local model versus a hosted model. Now, the hosted models are good and they are useful, but it's just that they're expensive, your data goes there, and you don't know how your data is getting used. But with a local model, it's not going anywhere. You know exactly what's going on with what you're doing.
Conversely, a Chinese hosted API raises the same questions any hosted API raises. What's being logged? How long is it retained? Who has access? This distinction gets collapsed constantly in public discourse, usually in ways that are more politically convenient than technically accurate. The actual risk calculus depends on deployment model, not country of origin.
True.
What this all comes down to is a fundamental difference in competitive strategy. Western frontier labs are playing a performance and control game. Build the most capable model, keep it proprietary, charge for access. The model is the moat. The value capture happens at the point of inference. Chinese AI labs are playing a distribution and ecosystem game, release capable models freely, build adoption, and capture value through the cloud services, enterprise contracts, and downstream infrastructure that adoption enables. The model is the entry point. The value capture happens further down the stack. Neither of these is inherently more generous than the other. One gives you the weights. The other gives you the weights and keeps the rest. Both are making rational decisions for their competitive position. The difference is that one of these strategies happens to produce artifacts you can download and run, and that has real and tangible benefits for the broader development community, regardless of the motivations behind it. The perceived openness of Chinese AI is real, in the sense that the models are accessible, capable, and useful to people who want to run AI without paying per token. But it's strategic, not ideological. It reflects a specific answer to a specific competitive problem. How do you build global relevance when you can't simply outspend your competitors on compute? You distribute, you make adoption frictionless, and you build the ecosystem. And then when everyone is already running your model, you figure out what to charge for.
That was actually a very good video, and based on what we were talking about in other videos, it kind of opens our eyes a little bit. We were looking up like closed weight models, open weight models before, and we were looking at kind of the differences of Western and Chinese models, but this really showed the difference and kind of put it plainly. So I definitely enjoyed watching this, and I learned a lot. I still do think that the model's efficiency is more important than anything else. Relying on the cloud can only get you so far, and you want, even if your model is closed, you would want a smaller version to run locally on your hardware, just so you can ingrain more users to it. And the name of the game for me is just being able to use your current hardware to run better and better models, just on your regular CPU and regular RAM and all that, so that you wouldn't need these massive data centers that constantly you need to churn out newer and better chips over and over again just to be able to keep them running. Because to me, the bottleneck is the cloud. And if you're able to kind of widen that by having some of the inference and compute happen locally on the user's infrastructure and only call to the cloud when needed, I think that's going to be a big game changer. Because a lot of times, some of them, you want to generate a simple document, and you give the model some text and you want it to just rewrite it. You wouldn't need a cloud for that, right? You want the model to generate a slide decks. You shouldn't need the cloud for that. The model should be able to just kind of whip it up right then and there. And how great would it be if it just did it based on the hardware you have? I know that's like a little bit of well-wishing, and maybe 5-6 years from now we have hardware that is capable of doing that. But that's kind of what I'm hoping for. is models being getting better and better at running on regular hardware. And yeah, let me know what you guys think. And yeah, let me know what you think. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you want to talk about. Like, subscribe, and until next time, see you guys later. Radio out.